Hi, my name is Jennifer, and I wanted to conduct research and present today about grief related to miscarriage. But first off, what is a miscarriage? Well, miscarriage refers to a pregnancy loss that occurs before hitting 20 weeks of pregnancy. And these 20 weeks are equivalent to 5 months. And for those of you that may not know much about pregnancy, about miscarriage and the difference between that and a stillbirth, well, a stillbirth has to occur um after that 20 weeks mark of pregnancy. And what are the common causes of a miscarriage? Well, according to experts, miscarriages happen for a variety of causes, but the most common are related and directly tied to chromosomal abnormalities. What a chromosomal abnormality means is that there's either too many or there's a lack of chromosomes needed for the healthy development of an embryo. And these abnormalities could lead to the following conditions: an embryonic pregnancy, which refers to when someone is pregnant, but there was no embryo formed, or there was an embryo formed, however, it was absorbed by the pregnant woman's body. Then it could also occur for an intrauterine fetal demise. And what this is that there was a developed embryo, however, it just stopped developing. And then there are also causes that are related to the quality of the mother's health. And these aren't really direct causes of a miscarriage. However, they are things that may increase the chances of a miscarriage to occur. For example, if a mother is choosing to smoke, to drink, to use drugs, those are definitely increasing factors that contribute to that. Or if they're also battling disorders or diseases such as obesity or um, diabetes or PCOS, that can definitely also impact the ability to carry out a healthy fetus all the way to term. Not to mention, this could contribute to um, cervix insufficiency or even placenta insufficiency. And this is some background knowledge so you can know how often does a miscarriage occur, like how prevalent is our miscarriages. Well, according to an article posted in 2023 by Yale Medicine, there's this estimate of 5 million pregnancies that occur each year in the US. And out of those 5 million pregnancies, around 1 million of those end up in unfortunate miscarriages. And I think it's also important to include that 20,000, an additional 20,000 of those result in stillbirth. And what are some unique features of this specific population of women experiencing miscarriages? And what are some unique features that can contribute to how they grieve? Well, first off, there is definitely a social stigma um, that you know, miscarriages is kind of like something that is kind of shamed on, looked at as a failure. And then there's also a lack of public knowledge. For example, for these two unique features, I wanted to kind of discuss this 2015 study that was conducted in the US. And ultimately, the purpose of this study was to kind of analyze the current perception of miscarriages. And according to all the participants, the majority of participants reported that they perceive miscarriages as a complication that occurred in less than 5% of all pregnancies occurring in the US. So ultimately, this contributes to the lack of public knowledge And that could contribute to it being more difficult to grieve as a woman experiencing miscarriage. And it completely contradicts the, the less than 5% of pregnancies being affected by miscarriage. It contradicts this whole idea that there's about 1 million miscarriages happening each year. So there's definitely not just, you know, just a simple complication that doesn't occur regularly. And I think it's also important to note that out of those million miscarriages that happen each year, according to Yale Medicine, half of those are basically sent, like half of those people that experience miscarriages are not aware of why the miscarriage occur. These couples or this mother is ultimately sent home with doctors telling them that the miscarriage occurred due to unknown causes. And according to Yale Medicine, this has happened for at least half of the miscarriages that happened in a given year. And luckily, there's definitely research by Yale researchers that support the idea that research on placenta and more research on placenta and analyzing it and studying it in the lab to um, could lead to more information about what caused a given miscarriage. Not to mention, a woman is not able to carry out, traditional grief rituals, such as a burial, a funeral, or even sometimes a cremation. They cannot carry out these grief rituals, which can ultimately feel um, make it more difficult for the person to grieve, for the person to have kind of that, closing chapter of life to their baby. And ultimately, sometimes when you can't carry out these traditional grief rituals, sometimes you feel like, oh, it may be harder to accept the death. And this is also difficult because you were never able to meet the person that did die, because they were an unborn child. Another unique feature of this population is that feelings of guilt and shame are extremely heightened, not only maybe due to the hormonal changes of pregnancy, but ultimately there's these feelings of guilt, these feelings of shame, these feelings of blame. A woman often feels, according to Psychology Today, women often feels that a miscarriage, it's because of their fault, because of the incompetence of their body. And not only does this make it hard to grieve, but it also has a tremendous impact on the woman's self-esteem. Not to mention that combined with, hormonal changes of pregnancy, it could be really difficult to not only face the loss, but also accept it. And ultimately, this is another unique feature amongst pregnant women that had miscarriages. Oftentimes, they have this desire to start a family, to grow their family. Therefore, PTSD is definitely amongst women who may have experienced miscarriages before, but ultimately experience PTSD because not only do they experience the loss, but they are scared that they won't be able to, they won't be able to carry out to term the baby again. And this could also connect to this miscarriage, cause of miscarriage unknown. If you don't know what the cause is, I can only imagine that when you try and get pregnant again, you are scared because you don't know how to increase the odds of your baby being carried all the way to term. And what are some interventions that I would personally recommend for grieving mothers that experience a miscarriage? Well, according to the Good Therapy blog that was posted in our Blackboard by our instructor, it really emphasized the importance of sometimes encouraging. but also creating your own rituals when a person in your life dies. And I believe that this is extremely impactful and beneficial for women who experienced a miscarriage because creating your rituals, you were not able to receive the right, or you weren't able to receive the privilege to carry out traditional grieving rituals such as a burial, a funeral, a cremation, things like that. Therefore, it may be worthwhile to create your own, to not accept the loss, but face the loss and kind of remember the person you lost, even though you weren't able to meet them. And for a woman who's grieving a miscarriage, this may look like setting a little altar, maybe a little baby blanket, a candle, with a written piece of paper of the unborn child's name to kind of not only come commemorate them, but also to process your emotions about that and not make it seem like, oh, I didn't meet them, I can't grieve them, you know? And then as people on the outside, it's important for us to definitely be sensitive to the grief process. And there's definitely some stigma about miscarriages, and there's definitely you know, the way to grieve is still in very much in the unknown because there's this idea, how can you grieve someone you never met? How can you grieve someone that didn't exist? Um, However, we as people on the outside supporting the individual, we must be sensitive to this because there was a connection for the mother and her unborn child, and we must be sensitive to how they grieve, when they grieve, and how they want to do that. Not to mention, give permission to speak of the deceased. This may be a little confusing because, like I said, how can you speak about someone you didn't meet or you didn't, you weren't able to connect with? However, I think it's important to give permission for the person to speak of the deceased because, like I said, they are in a specific and very unique position. However, speaking about the miscarriage, the experience that went along with it, I think would really help for them not only to face it, but also process their emotions and not feel like it's all bottled up. And these are all my references, and thank you very much.